before coming to this live, we were somehow talking about the possibilities of a war breaking out in the next, I don't know, in the next 24, 48, 72, because everybody's talking about these sort of predictions. But here is when it comes to the drones, we had Russian and Iranian naval exercises
Right.
yesterday. And here is what was said on Fox News in terms of the use of drones and how capable these two countries are today.
Well, hey, good morning, Carly. Well, Iran, as usual, keeps thinking they can get away with it, that America isn't watching. And this posturing for war, I think, is a major mistake on behalf of the Iranians. The history shows it only ends badly for them. Between us and the Israelis, we have a lot of intelligence information on them. They like to hide their drone operations under this guise of exercises, but yet we're almost, flying ours in broad daylight. And I think that's the difference between a regime pretending to project strength and a real military that actually has it. What we're seeing right now, it's not just this routine military maneuvering. It's a chess match in the air. Iran's repositioning strike drones under the cover of these drills with Russia. And that tells me two things immediately. First, they still don't want transparency. And second, they're testing this battle positioning under plausible deniability. And by the way, let's not forget that this is exactly what Russia did before they went to war in Ukraine. They lied to the world, and they even, with their own soldiers saying they were conducting military drills, they went across the border and conducted operations. And look, I spent a lot of time working with U.S. MQ-1s and MQ-9 Reapers. When the U.S. MQ-9 Reaper operates in that region, we're not posturing, we're collecting. We're mapping radar signatures, we're identifying command and control nodes, we're watching how Iranian drone units deploy, how quickly they reposition, what frequencies they're using, how they're integrated with the Russians. The Reaper, it's not just a precision drone strike platform, it's this flying sensor hub, and the U.S. is gathering data that matters before a crisis. But really, Tehran, they've got to think really long and hard before testing U.S. resolve again.
Yeah.
Yeah, he didn't know what he's talking about. I mean, he says he's an intelligence analyst. Shows you what a shitty analyst he was, because, number one, these, quote, naval exercises that are underway, this is the 8th consecutive year that it's been done. Now, China was supposed to be involved with this, and I think China is actually backed out because it's shadowing the Abraham Lincoln. It's the Chinese naval forces. But this is not an exercise that was ginned up in the last few weeks in response to pressure from the United States. This was not an exercise that was designed to show strength to the United States. This thing is planned 18 months in advance. That's why I say that. And this guy was a military analyst. He should know that. But, he's just a blind propagandist. Look, Iran's level of sophistication was demonstrated, well, what was it now? It's almost 14 years ago, where they brought down a CIA drone that really has become sort of it was a prototype for the Shahed, what the Iranians produce. They brought it down. They intercepted the communications and were able to take it over and bring it down to the ground, not crashing it. And then they've been able to reverse engineer it. They've also got their hands on MQ-9 Reapers. So it's the United States that's playing with fire here. That we think we've got enough military strength to take on Iran on their home turf. If we do it, we're going to suffer significant casualties. It's highly likely that if Trump decides to proceed, he's talked about, well, we're going to do a limited strike. Iran's made it clear they're not going to judge it limited or massive. If they are hit, they're going to retaliate with everything that they've got. And they're going to blow up American bases. They're going to try to sink American ships. They're going to shoot down American aircraft. And the White House, I'm told, through military channels, has been briefed that they anticipate the possibility of 10,000 American casualties. Let that settle in. That's more casualties than we incurred in Afghanistan and Iraq over a 20-year period from, post 2001 until 2021. So this is, the potential cost in this is astronomical. And again, this joke of a military analyst, all he's doing is propagandizing and promoting a narrative.
And you wonder how much he got paid. I saw this before the Iraq War in 2003, and some of the people that spoke, like Barry McCaffrey, who before that I just sat across from him in the chairman's mess and had breakfast and dinner with, and thought was a really decent person, still a decent person, but he shilled for Fox and for CNN and a whole bunch of others, talking about the Iraq War and talking about it in positive terms and so forth. And I know that he got money for doing that. And to me, that's unconscionable. But let me take a higher plane than Larry just eviscerated him in terms of the granular detail. But let's look at that from, let's say I'm back at state. Let's look at that from the perspective of global relations. What does he mean saying what he said about a sovereign country that presents no threat to the United States of America, that is only being threatened by the United States of America because of its relationship with Israel, that is free to do whatever it wants to do in its own environment, whenever and however it wants to do it, as long as it doesn't impact, in this case, on some operation, let's say, and I'm stretching it here even, that the United States might be conducting in the Arabian Sea, like freedom of navigation or whatever. None of this is going on. We're the culprits here. And yet, look at him. He's doing nothing but accusing them of being the culprits. Yeah. So what? It's like Ahmadinejad told me in New York when I was talking to him about an incidents at sea agreement. Let's get this straight now, he said. Who's got shoreline on the Persian Gulf of 1,800 nautical miles or more? And who doesn't have any at all? Bingo. Yeah, okay, we have the right to be in international waters, and the law of the sea says this, that, and the other thing about them. But at the same time, he's made a point. This is their country. This is their sphere of influence. We are there. What are they supposed to do about that? And they know damn well what we're prepping to do.
Larry, Donald Trump said that he has given the Iranian part 10 to 15 days. In
10 days.
10 days. What's so much, when you look at what they're talking about in the mainstream media, they're basically talking about that the United States has asked Iranian part with no enrichment. And this wasn't the case. It seems that Arakchi, he had an interview and he said something totally different. And here is what he said about the second round of negotiations.
Well, I think the speculations that you just made are not true. We are now working with each other. Both of them. We have not offered any suspension, and the U.S. side has not asked for zero enrichment. The question is...
So let me stop you there. Let me stop you there because I'm just... That has been reported. So I just want for people that are watching the show that have read that, your position is that the United States didn't ask for a permanent suspension of enrichment. Is that what you're telling me?
Yes. What we are now talking about is how to make sure that Iran's nuclear program, including enrichment, is peaceful and would remain peaceful forever.
Would you connect? Because it's unbelievable. They didn't talk about it, but they're asking for more in the mainstream media. That no, we not only ask them to just ignore the enriching uranium on Iranian soil, but we're asking something else in terms of ballistic missiles, in terms of the support for the Hamas, for Hezbollah, for Yemenis, and all of that.
Yeah. Well, look, if Donald Trump was actually in charge, I mean, if he was the actual decision maker, I think he would actually go along with this deal. But let's step back and look at the joke that this process is. Trump's lead negotiators are Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. son-in-law. They were in Geneva last Tuesday. How did this work out? These guys were like a crew on a submarine hot racking, okay? You know, one guy climbs in and sleeps, and the other guy climbs in and sleeps, you know, because what did they do? Well, first there's Witkoff and Kushner in with the Russians and the Ukrainians. Jaw, 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 jaw. Oh, hey, excuse us, we got to go to the other room. So then they run into another room, and instead of talking to the Iranians, they talk to some guy from Oman and say, okay, tell the Iranians that we believe X, Y, and Z. And we'll be back to hear the answer. And then they run back to the other room. And with the Russians and the Ukrainians, you know, can't we all get along? Oh, wait, we got an answer back. Who does this? This is a joke. This is not serious people. And at the end, you didn't have the Iranians and the Americans talking together. And so until we get that, we don't have any serious negotiation. This is all bullshit. And we need to stop pretending that it's meaningful. Because the reality is what we saw last time, that they had some sort of, quote, agreement that Witkoff said, okay, yeah, we'll allow you to continue some minimal enrichment. He comes back to Washington and says, hey, boss, this is the deal we got. And then the whole Zionist crowd started kicking him in the ass. And next thing you know, well, never mind, we didn't mean that. I said, this is, and they try now to pretend that this is about negotiating an end to Iran's nuclear program. How can you put an end to a program that's been obliterated, according to Trump? I mean, you know, you can't end what's destroyed. And so the lack of logic and consistency in this it's enormous. That's why I say this is all theater. This is absolutely has no meaning whatsoever. The only thing that's guiding Trump in this is, can I get away with attacking him and inflict the kind of damage I want without it killing my administration? That's the only issue that's at stake.
What would be the response to that, Carl? Which we know?
I agree with Larry 100%. And elevating Jared Kushner to the status of a special envoy was just laughable. I understand now they're giving that serious thought as to whether they should do that, because special envoy has to go before the Congress and be at least questioned as to what his credentials are and what he's going to do and that sort of thing. At least they're supposed to. That's been the practice and custom. That doesn't make him a diplomat. You don't go fairy dust, and make someone a diplomat. And Larry's absolutely right. I'm stunned when Netanyahu was listing those things and looking into the card, or I don't know what he was looking at, cue cards or whatever. And he comes to the one about Hamas and Hezbollah and all the terrorist organizations, and they have to be eliminated. That's part of the deal, you know, the 4 things he listed that had to be a part of the deal. And I'm saying to myself, wait a minute, you said they were destroyed. You said you completely destroyed them. Hezbollah and Hamas, you're still working on Hamas. I can see that. Do you know how many people they've killed since the ceasefire? I mean, just by the admission of a Haaretz, 200 people they've killed since the beginning of the ceasefire. Double that, triple that, probably. But this is no ceasefire. He's still doing exactly what he was doing before, and he's increased it in the West Bank. But these people are lying sacks of proverbial horse turds. There's no question about that. Diplomats? Give me a break. And I think the Iranians finally have figured that out. So I don't think they're believing anything that they're hearing other than the bombs are going to drop.
How can Donald Trump wants, if he starts a war against Iran, he wants a quick war, because I don't see Donald Trump being that much patient to continue a continuous war. How is that possible, Larry? Who's gonna convince him that it's gonna be a quick war and you're gonna get something out of this quick war against Iran?
All you need to do is look at history, and with probably the only time in which we've had something which I'd call a semi-quick, and it wasn't a war, but when we decided to take out the regime change in Panama and get rid of Manuel Noriega, We launched a military operation. We took over Tocumen Airfield, the international airport. We parachuted in. I forget if it was the 101st or the 82nd.
82nd.
Was it the 82nd?
Yeah.
But we had the advantage then. We still had U.S. presence both at Quarry Heights. Southcom was still based there. We still had a presence up in Cologne. And still, it took us several days to try to corral Noriega. Other than that, every other quick war we've had has turned into some protracted affair. 2003 invasion of Iraq is the biggest case in point. We started in March. We quote, mission accomplished by May. And then, years later, we were still fighting an insurgency, still didn't have control of the country. So this overly optimistic view, and God, it's been typical of the Air Force, going back to when they were Army Air Corps in World War II with the 8th Air Force, that they thought they could always win a war from the air, just drop enough bombs and create enough devastation, and God, the people will surrender. Well, in fact, we've had, if you want to call it a laboratory experiment in Gaza. Look at what the Israelis have done to Gaza, an area 5 miles wide, 25 miles long, quite contained. They have literally incinerated the place over the last 2 years, and yet they still don't control it. The Israelis had the advantage. They've got a 300,000 man army going up against a 30,000, 40,000 group of insurgents that are underground. So this fantasy we have that we're going to launch all these airstrikes, they're forgetting that Iran has a say in this, but also now China and Russia. And we're seeing China and Russia engage with Iran on a level and scale never seen before. Let's note that on January 29th, in the aftermath of that failed color revolution, Iran signed a trilateral security agreement with Russia and China. This was on top of the bilateral agreement that Iran and Russia signed a year ago, and that Iran and China signed like 3 years ago. So they've stepped that up. And you've seen the Chinese deploy their most advanced radar, which is capable of detecting stealth aircraft 300 miles out from Iran's borders. You've seen Russian air defense systems, S-300, S-400, are deployed and integrated into that Chinese radar system. And you saw that also 2 weeks ago. Russia supplied Iran with some attack helicopters. Now, why would they do that? Well, we've now learned that supposedly British SAS have been inserted into Iran with an effort to carry out and try to promote an insurrection. And again, this preoccupation with special operations forces is just idiotic, because I'm sure, as Colonel Wilkerson remembers, during the first Gulf War, the British put in a unit that they were going to go find some Scuds. They wrote a book about it called Bravo 20. And it's a story about how most of those Brits died of exposure or got killed by the Iraqis. 2 or 3 of them survived. But the notion that you're going to put special operations forces on the ground in Iran ignores the fact that a human being can only carry so much ammunition, so much food and water. And when you're maneuvering in the mountains of Iran, that kicks your ass. And so, like I said, this fantasy world that the U.S. military planners are living in, they're going to get a rude awakening if they decide to go forward with attacking Iran.
Yeah, I don't know. Just to add to that, I don't know what these guys are thinking, because when I was at PACOM, Pacific Command at the time, and we were the force provider for the little tiny thing called Central Command, we had major planning going on to fight the Soviets in Iran, because we thought that they were in Afghanistan. They've always coveted a warm water port down at the southern end of the Persian Gulf. Therefore, it doesn't take a brain to figure out, hey, they're going to go down through Iran and they're going to try to do that. because what do they want in Afghanistan other than the political business with the president? So we started planning. Well, let me tell you something. When you get to the Zagros Mountains, Nima, when you get to that terrain that almost killed Alexander the Great,
Actually, I'm from the Zagros Mountains.
Okay. You've got a real problem, a significant problem. We didn't see how we were going to get armored columns through there without them being attrited majorly, because all you got to do is a Hannibal, be up on the edges of the pass and kill the tanks. It's tough terrain. I realize technology's moved forward and everything, but it's tough terrain. And I don't think these guys are considering how difficult it'd be. But that tells me Larry's right. They're counting on air power. They're counting on they're not thinking about putting anybody on the ground except some stupid SAS from Britain so they can have a piece of the action. That's about all Britain has.
Yeah.
They're not going to put anybody on the ground. They are smart enough not to do that. They're not going to put any armor on the ground. They're not going to put anything on the ground. They're going to count on bombs and missiles, period. And I'm sorry, as Larry said, it ain't going to do it. So what do you do when you come to the end of this expenditure of billions of dollars and maybe a couple of platforms sunk by the Iranians out in the North Arabian Sea that'll put a casualty list on the front page above the full right side of the New York Times that the Americans have not seen in their lifetime? What are you going to do then? Where's your presidency then?
Well, and let me point out, Nima, one of the things that's taking place is that you've got senior policymakers in DOD, CIA, White House that believe that there is overwhelming opposition to the Ayatollah, to the Islamic Republic. And what is that based on? Well, there's been surveys done, polling done in Iran, and it's done by a group called GAMAN, G-A-M-A-A-N. I presume that's how it's pronounced. They're based in the Netherlands, and they work in tandem with a company that does a VPN, Visifon or something like that. It's based in Ottawa. So I started looking into. So they got these results. They've done this polling. It's done over the internet, so that they're confident that they got really good results. 80% of Iranians hate the mullahs and can't wait to get rid of them. 80%. So I looked into the funding source. Geez, NED, National Endowment for Democracy, and USAID. Go figure that.
The Pahlavi family.
Yeah. Now, take that apart and look at the University of Maryland, which has conducted polling using the old-fashioned techniques of telephone. Now, the folks at GAMAN say, that you can't rely on that because the people, it's such an authoritarian regime in Iran that they'll definitely not tell you the truth. But the Maryland polling shows the exact opposite results, that it's only about less than 20% that are insisting the mullah's got to go. Well, the U.S. policymakers have seized on the results that the U.S. government has paid for to justify their perception. And yet, I think, and I'll direct this back at you because you can talk about your own experience, but we forget what happened in the United States when we were attacked on 9/11. And without getting into was the CIA involved or not, the effect was it brought Democrats, Republicans, and independents together in a unity because we'd been attacked from the outside. Well, let me suggest that 12-day war last June had the same effect in Iran. Because, as you and I talked with Professor Morandi, you really have no memory. You're too young. You have no memory of the Iran-Iraq War. That Iran-Iraq War did inspire some nationalism in Iran. But since the end of that war, there has not been one single event that has galvanized the Iranian public until June 13th, 2025. And all of a sudden, for the first time, here's Iran being attacked, acts of war by Israel and the United States with no reason, no justification. And that in fact has united Iran in a way that it never has been for say 30 years.